This video didn't quite turn out as I expected. The first of the 5-minute drawing exercises was just fine, but the second one didn't go the way I thought. And then I had a most unexpected surprise at the end that I do show you, and I'd love to get your comments on. So even if you don't want to watch the whole video, if you can go just to the last 3 minutes and let me know what you think, I'd appreciate that. Drawing certainly is an adventure. Let's start though with the first 5-minute drawing exercise that did go as planned. This 5-minute drawing exercise subject is one of the towers, one of the spires on a Wren church in London. It's a nice scale and a nice subject with enough interest, but also simple enough that we can hopefully get a nice gestural drawing of it done in just 5 minutes. It's really important that we push ourselves to stay 5, 6, 7 minutes with these, because it's partly that sense of we're not going to spend very long on this that frees us up to be relatively free in our line work, to not be so caught up with, oh, it has to be perfect, because when we're not taking much time to do it, we've already allowed for the fact that it's not going to be accurate in every way. We're really trying to capture something of the feel of this subject. And particularly if we struggle with being perfectionistic, if we like to do pencil under drawings and erase any lines that aren't perfect before we then try and do the ink over the top, it just bypasses all of that. And also, we learn things by tackling different subjects that we don't learn as much by doing very similar subjects all the time. And I've noticed that myself just in the dozen of these 5-minute exercises I've done for YouTube. Just the improvement, I think, that I found in doing things that range from spires to buildings to candlesticks to waterfalls to trees, that it just pushes us to experiment more. And that's always a good thing when it comes to drawing. So with this, I've just started on the base. The biggest challenge I think with this will be to keep it looking nice and straight, because it is a fairly slender spire, and the more slender it is, the more it will show any lean as it goes upwards. But also the other challenge is the foreshortening. We're not looking straight at this spire, we're from the ground looking up slightly. And so it becomes more foreshortened as it gets higher. And as it gets higher, we can see underneath the rims of the cornices more. So I need to be aware of that to some degree. That's the kind of thing that is good to focus on before I start to draw, so that when I do start to draw, I can be doing that almost without thinking. That as I look further and further up the spire, I'm looking more underneath it and the view changes. And the foreshortening means I'm not going to draw the actual thinnest part of the spire at the top quite as long as I would draw it if I was standing back further. Now about this stage, I realise that I've used almost 4 minutes, I think, or something like that, and I get quite horrified. And so I draw the top half even faster than I've drawn this. But in some ways, I have already drawn most of the detail. At least most of the fiddly detail, which does slow you down. The shadows between the louvers and the shadows between the little decorative things on the cornice of the top of the square tower section. So I've done some of the more time-consuming things. So I take care in the little time I've got to think as I draw this to line up what I'm doing with each of these tiers of the spire with what's underneath. I'm also aware that the perspective angle increases slightly as I go further up for all the horizontal lines. And so that's another thing just to be aware of. I don't want them to be parallel. I want them to very slightly increase in angle for the left-hand side of all horizontal lines to be slightly higher than the one underneath it. Now, I think it was at this stage actually that I saw I was over 4 minutes, and I just was doing that shadowed arch, and I thought, my goodness, I better get a move on. And of course, if with any of these 5-minute drawing improvement exercises you really enjoy it, there's nothing to stop you to use this as a preparatory sketch and to come back to it and do a 15, 20, 30-minute drawing of the same object. There's nothing that means that it has to be a 5-minute subject. And you can see the way I draw this spire, the rounded bulbous section at the base of it. I divide it into 2 sections. And I find this helps me to do the convex and the concave curves separately, lets me get the form better. If I just try to draw them as lines on each side, I find that I don't capture the form in an accurate enough way. This second 5-minute drawing exercise is one that I thought might have been a bit ambitious, and it certainly was. It took me 7 minutes before I stopped drawing, and even then, after I'd finished and looked at it, I still thought, it looks a bit underdone. I wouldn't mind spending just a few more minutes on it. So I'll point out when my original 7 minutes is over, and then the additional time I spent just adding more lines to strengthen some of the contrasts of light and dark, and you can see what you think of that. I mean, in some ways, it's as if the original 7 minutes was preparatory drawing or the blocking out stage of a slightly more detailed drawing that took a little bit more time than that. But at this point, I am aware that the contrast between the darkness of this rock overhang and the foaming water is going to be really important. And so I actually spent quite a lot of time just doing the hatch work. And so really, for these 5-minute exercises, any scene where darker values is going to be fundamentally important is going to make it a bit of a challenge in terms of the time limit, because no matter how loosely, no matter how gestural our line drawing is, it still takes a certain amount of time to do a certain number of lines. And really the water is all being captured by negative space. The water is going to be captured by drawing the darkness of the rock around and underneath the water. We're not really going to be drawing the water itself. And so I also need to define the edges where the water starts to roll over and starts to foam. So this would be an interesting scene to do with a little more time. I didn't even dream of trying to draw the figures in. At least 1 or 2 of the figures would have been good, because it just would have given a little bit of scale so we could see, well, what size is this waterfall? And of course, it's not just the waterfall coming over the rock edge, but it's also the water as it hits whatever surface it hits lower down, whether it's another rock ledge, as is for quite a bit of this waterfall, and then eventually the water in the pool beneath as the creek winds its way further along. This is a very typical Australian scene, particularly with all the young people jumping in and out of the waterfall. And we have these trees in the background. And I must admit, because the time constraint was so great, I really just didn't even have time to think about trying to draw the foliage with a sense of the scale. So I've made it probably look too large, which again has the effect probably of making the waterfall feel smaller than it really is, particularly without the figures there. Now at this point I am focused on the foam. You'll notice how I use just a series of dotted lines to try and define the lines, the edges of either stronger sections of the foam in water, the whiter sections, or where there is a rock ledge, or where there's an edge to a much thicker section of foaming, bouncing foam, so that I can make sure that I don't take any lines past that, because preserving that white is really important. And unfortunately, in a 5-minute drawing where there is this time pressure, we can just lose concentration enough to put lines into some of that reserved space. But I'm trying to make some of these sections dark enough as well. Again, we have the problem that in a very quick drawing, any hatching for value is going to take up our precious moments as they slip away. I'm happy enough with how the waterfall's going at this point, but I am aware that there is no context. I really feel like we need to have some vegetation above, and so I'm just trying to work out what I will do for that. And here we have almost a cartoon silhouette of a bush. So I really am feeling the pressure at this stage, doing some of the things I tell you not to do. But I am hoping also that the greater darkness around the waterfall will draw the attention, and that this really will be more peripheral. So I really am just trying to do some lines that suggest these trees. But I have lost all sense of scale, and you can see that these trees do come across as being larger than they are in life, or closer is another way. So maybe we'll just think of them as being closer rather than out of scale. And at this point, my time is almost up. I haven't yet realised that I'm going to actually spend a bit more than the 7 minutes that I put into it here. But I do want to put something in the foreground for the water rippling, and also something just closer to that foam at the bottom of the waterfall, to give a sense of the foam, which of course I can only do by drawing the non-foam, the darker parts. So a little more stronger contrast then, just to make the water stand out more. And then, if you like, stage 1 of the 5-minute waterfall that's taken almost 7 minutes at this stage to draw is pretty much over. Just getting the last of this line work in front done, and just accentuating some of the shadows in this closer stream of water. But I really have enjoyed drawing something that is different to the challenges that I normally face in the subjects that I normally draw. I have really enjoyed these natural Australian bush, country, outback scenes. Just trying to define some of the more foaming parts better at this point. So now I start my extra time. Now, this was another 6 minutes in the end, and I've sped it up to 2 minutes because I don't want these videos to be too long, and it really is in some ways more of the same. I'm increasing the values with more hatching to get greater contrast between the darks and the shadows and the foam, so as the foaming water has showed up more. I'm also doing a little more work on this foliage above the rock ledge, and then some more work on the water down the front as well, and I end up doing a bit more work on some of the foam areas as well. Just a little bit more darkness. Trying to get variation in the effects we create. If we're not careful, we end up getting a uniformity in so many ways across our drawing. So a little more darkness underneath the rock ledge, a little more darkness further up. I think with waterfalls, it is important to understand how the rocks look without the water. It's a bit like figure drawing. Understanding the anatomy of the figure before we put clothes on, I think, is important. I can't understand how the water's falling if I don't know what it's falling from and falling to. But otherwise, it's really just trying to create the shapes of the whiteness. What do you think? And here are the two drawings side by side, if you like. The one at 7 minutes and the one with an additional 6 minutes of drawing time. Do you have a preference? Do you think it works better with less or with more? In fact, I have a third option, and that's the 2-minute quick thumbnail I did before I started, just to work out my marks. I think it's actually the one that I like best of all. Here it is. What do you think? Do you agree with me that this maybe captures a sense of the movement better than the two that I actually took more time over? Let me know in the comments what you think. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Perhaps this one was a bit too ambitious for a 5-minute drawing exercise, but why not give it a go? And look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. Even if you take 15 minutes for a 5-minute drawing. I'll see you next time. Bye.